Okay, so moving into topic 2 here, this is all about biotic interaction. So we're going to zoom in and look at the living things interacting. Big ideas to be on the lookout for as we go. First, what is symbiosis? What is parasitism, commensalism, and mutualism? What are the general trends seen in predator-prey relationships, that should say? What is competition in a biological sense, okay? And what is the difference between interspecies and intra-species competition? Okay, so we're on page 2 of the biology notes here. Normally we would do this in class. I would kind of get you to read those pages in your textbook and try out these questions. In the interest of time, I'm just going to move past this for now. We're going to look at a different kind of study of it. If you want, if you have your textbook at home, this is a really good activity to get you thinking about the way that stuff interacts, okay? But what we do need from this page is just the idea of what a biotic interaction is. So again, biotic, what does that mean? Living, right? So just like the name suggests, biotic interactions are just interactions between biotic factors. Often, and really always, biotic factors exist in kind of a delicate balance, okay? With each organism having a niche that contributes to the equilibrium. Niche just means a role, a job. Everyone has a job to do in an ecosystem. Everything has a purpose in an ecosystem. So in that study that I would have got you to read, it talks about how prairie dogs and bison have a big effect on each other by living in close proximity. So I'm going to show you a video that kind of does a different example of this here. But as you watch the video, I just want you to think about how all of these organisms in this ecosystem contribute to the overall equilibrium, right? There's some really big changes that occur when certain interactions are removed or added from an ecosystem, okay? Each organism has a role in the sustainability of an ecosystem. What does that word sustainability mean? It means the ability of it to be sustained, right? For it to be ongoing and to support itself. All right, let's watch the video.
One of the most exciting scientific findings of the past half-century has been the discovery of widespread trophic cascades. A trophic cascade is an ecological process which starts at the top of the food chain and tumbles all the way down to the bottom. And the classic example is what happened in the Yellowstone National Park in the United States when wolves were reintroduced in 1995. Now, we all know that wolves kill various species of animals, but perhaps we're slightly less aware that they give life to many others. Before the wolves turned up, they'd been absent for 70 years, that the numbers of deer, because there was nothing to hunt them, had built up and built up in the Yellowstone Park, and despite efforts by humans to control them, they'd managed to reduce much of the vegetation there to almost nothing. They'd just grazed it away. But as soon as the wolves arrived, even though they were few in number, they started to have the most remarkable effects. First, of course, they killed some of the deer, but that wasn't the major thing. Much more significantly, they radically changed the behavior of the deer. The deer started avoiding certain parts of the park, the places where they could be trapped most easily, particularly the valleys and the gorges. And immediately those places started to regenerate. In some areas, the height of the trees quintupled in just 6 years. Bare valley sides quickly became forests of aspen and willow and cottonwood. And as soon as that happened, the birds started moving in. The number of songbirds, of migratory birds, started to increase greatly. The number of beavers started to increase because beavers like to eat the trees. And beavers, like wolves, are ecosystem engineers. They create niches for other species. And the dams they built in the rivers provided habitats for otters and muskrats and ducks and fish and reptiles and amphibians. The wolves killed coyotes, and as a result of that, the number of rabbits and mice began to rise, which meant more hawks, more weasels, more foxes, more badgers. Ravens and bald eagles came down to feed on the carrion that the wolves had left. Bears fed on it too, and their population began to rise as well, partly also because there were more berries growing on the regenerating shrubs. And the bears reinforced the impact of the wolves by killing some of the calves of the deer. But here's where it gets really interesting. The wolves changed the behavior of the rivers. They began to meander less. There was less erosion. The channels narrowed, more pools formed, more riffle sections, all of which were great for wildlife habitats. The rivers changed in response to the wolves. And the reason was that the regenerating forests stabilized the banks so that they collapsed less often, so that the rivers became more fixed in their course. Similarly, by driving the deer out of some places and the vegetation recovering on the valley sides, there was less soil erosion because the vegetation stabilized that as well. So the wolves, small in number, transformed not just the ecosystem of the Yellowstone National Park, this huge area of land, but also its physical geography.
There are obviously many ways that organisms can interact in an ecosystem. We're going to look at three main types, and some of those will get broken down into other types. Okay, so the first one we're going to look at is symbiosis or symbiotic interactions. Okay, then we'll look at predation and competition, but let's start with the symbiosis. What is symbiosis? Symbiosis is an ongoing ecological relationship that benefits at least one of two organisms living in close contact with each other, right? Why do you think it benefits at least one? Well, if it didn't, why would they be in that relationship, right? If no one's benefiting from the relationship, there's no reason for them to be in it. So the key there is the ongoing. That part is very important. Okay, we'll see later how we can compare. So I'm going to actually hop over to the PowerPoint again to look at three types of symbiosis, just because that way we can get some visuals as we go. Okay, so there are three main types: mutualism, commensalism, and parasitism. So let's start with mutualism. Okay, mutualism is when both organisms benefit from the relationship. So happy face, or plus plus, we sometimes, they're both getting a positive out of it. Okay, so just to look at some examples of mutualism, right? We have these guys are called oxpeckers, and that's an ox that they're sitting on. So these things are in an ongoing, lasting relationship where they both benefit. So what do they both get out of this? Well, the oxpeckers, they eat little pests, little ticks, flies, bugs, whatever, that are going to be biting the ox and draining its nutrients, right? Taking its energy. So the oxpeckers sit on these ox and they just pick away at whatever little pests are in their fur and their skin, right? So what does the ox get out of it? Well, he gets clean. He gets rid of all these pests that are draining his nutrients and his energy. What do the oxpeckers get out of it? They get a free meal, right? They get a kind of a walking buffet of pests and ticks and things they can eat at. Okay, this is maybe one of the most important examples of mutualism in nature. Bees and flowers, or a lot of insects, right? Not just bees. So they both benefit from this. What do bees get out of it? Well, they get the nectar from the plant to go make honey with, right? What do the flowers get out of it? Well, they get their pollen on the bee or the insect, and then that allows them to reproduce when the insect goes and spreads that pollen around to other flowers. Okay, lichen, you might not know this. Lichen is actually not one organism. You ever seen lichen on a rock or on trees or whatever? It's actually a symbiotic mutualistic relationship between two organisms. So it's usually either like an algae or a bacteria, one of those two things that can do photosynthesis, and then a fungus. So it's a relationship between something that can do photosynthesis and a fungus. The fungus benefits from the algae because it does photosynthesis. It provides food, and the algae benefits because the fungus provides some shape and structure and protection for it. And back to this guy again, right? Your body is one big example of mutualism, right? The bacteria in your gut that help you digest food are in a mutualistic symbiotic relationship with you. You benefit because they help you break down food and get the nutrients that you need out of it. You actually could not digest food properly without these guys. And they benefit, of course, because in that digestion process, they are also getting nutrients from your food. Okay, the next type is commensalism. So commensalism is when the relationship benefits one organism, and then the other organism doesn't really care. They are neither helped nor harmed. So happy face, meh face, or positive/0. That's how we represent it. Okay. So for example, a bird building its nest in a tree, right? What does the bird get? Home, protection, safe space to have babies. The tree doesn't really care. And that's not going to bother the tree at all. It's also not going to help the tree, but it's not going to hurt the tree. Barnacles on a whale. This is a commensalistic relationship. Barnacles can't move around, at least not very quickly, which can make it difficult to get food, especially if food is running out where they're at, right? So what they can do is attach themselves to a whale, and then the whale will transport them. And now the barnacles are able to move with the whale as it moves, so they can pick up food in the ocean as this whale goes along. The whale doesn't care, right? The barnacles are just there, whatever. not bothering it, but they're not helping it either. This one here, we have something called a pilot fish. There's actually lots of different types of pilot fish. What they do is they basically follow the shark, okay? And when the shark is eating a meal, right, it kind of will drop little leftovers and stuff. So the shark wasn't going to eat those leftovers. And these guys just kind of grab onto those little small particles of whatever that they can. So they benefit. The shark doesn't really care. He wasn't going to eat that stuff anyway. Okay, so commensalist because shark really doesn't care. The pilot fish benefit. Okay, now parasitism is kind of the only combination left, right? When one benefits and one is actually harmed, a positive and a negative. Okay, so an example of parasitism is a mosquito, right? It comes and it steals your nutrients. It benefits because it gets a meal. You are harmed because that's your energy, right? You're also just annoyed, but it is stealing a little bit of your nutrients that you got from eating your food, right? This mosquito is a freeloader. This one is pretty freaky, okay? So what this is called a tongue louse. Why is it called a tongue louse? Well, what it does is the eggs will get into the fish's mouth somehow, usually because it eats something that had the eggs laid in it, okay? And then when the eggs hatch, this little tongue louse will come in and it has these hooks that it kind of uses to kind of dig in, and it actually eats the fish's tongue. And then with those hooks that it used to anchor itself in the fish's mouth, now when the fish goes to eat stuff, that little tongue louse is going to get a little piece. That's why it's a tongue louse. It has become the fish's tongue. So now when the fish goes to eat food, the tongue louse acts like a little goalie and it gets a little piece of all the action, right? So the fish still gets some food, so it stays alive longer, which is good for the tongue louse because now the longer that fish stays alive, the longer it can keep getting free meals out of this. I'll show you this one. This one is pretty mind-blowing, okay?
Incredibly, 80% of all insects live in jungles. Few are more successful than the ants. There can be 8 million individuals in a single hectare. But jungle ants don't have it all their own way. These bullet ants are showing some worrying symptoms. Spores from a parasitic fungus called cordyceps have infiltrated their bodies and their minds. Its infected brain directs this ant upwards. Then, utterly disorientated, it grips a stem with its mandibles. Those afflicted that are discovered by the workers are quickly taken away and dumped far away from the colony. It seems extreme, but this is the reason why. Like something out of science fiction, the fruiting body of the cordyceps erupts from the ant's head. It can take 3 weeks to grow, and when finished, the deadly spores will burst from its tip. Then any ant in the vicinity will be in serious risk of death. The fungus is so virulent it can wipe out whole colonies of ants. And it's not just ants that fall victim to this killer. There are literally thousands of different types of cordyceps fungi, and remarkably, each specializes on just one species. But these attacks do have a positive effect on the jungle's diversity, since parasites like these stop any one group of animal getting the upper hand. The more numerous a species becomes, the more likely it will be attacked by its nemesis, a cordyceps fungus.
So, real life zombies, right? The fungus took over the ant's brain and made it climb, right? The fungus benefits because it makes the ant climb to a nice high place where it can spread its spores as far as possible. The ant is obviously harmed because, well, it becomes a zombie and eventually dies. Okay, so all of these are parasitism where one benefits and the other is harmed. So here we have all three types, right? The key to figuring out what type of symbiotic relationship you're looking at is figuring out who benefits, right? Someone will always benefit, otherwise they just wouldn't be in that relationship. And then ask yourself, what does the other person think? So does the other organism also benefit, or is it harmed, or would it not care? That's the key to deciding what kind of symbiotic relationship you're looking at. So looking at these, let's see if we can apply that. Okay, so some practice. Pause the video, try these on your own, see if you can figure out, and then you can come back and check my answers. So now let's try the first one, okay? So a bird builds its nest in a large tree, providing shelter and a place to hatch offspring. So who definitely benefits? The bird, right? It gets shelter and a place to hatch its offspring. So definitely the bird benefits, okay? Now does that just means figure out what's happening to the other thing? So does the tree, we kind of saw this one, I know, but does a tree benefit from a bird building its nest there? Is it harmed, or does it not really care? Well, it doesn't really care, right? We would say it's zero. It doesn't, the tree is fine with the bird living there. It doesn't really like it, but it doesn't not like it. Whatever. It's just a bird. So this is commensalism. Okay. Remora fish attach themselves to sharks and eat harmful parasites while getting transportation. What does that sound like? Who definitely benefits? Well, it said the remora fish get transportation, so right away I would say, yep, they benefit. Now, the other organism we're looking at here is sharks. So we decide, do sharks benefit, not care, or do they actually get harmed here? Well, the remora fish is eating harmful parasites off of the shark. So that shark's going to benefit. That likes that. They don't want harmful parasites on them, right? So that is definitely mutualism. Okay, tapeworms steal nutrients by lodging themselves in a digestive system. So stealing nutrients, that doesn't sound good. The tapeworm's getting nutrients, so tapeworm definitely benefits. Now, this other organism, whatever it is, does it benefit? No, right? It's having its nutrients stolen. So it's going to care. That's bad. It's actually harmed. Parasitism. One benefits, one is harmed. Okay, so we've looked at our first big type, right? That was symbiotic reactions now, and we broke down into three separate types. Now we're going to move on to the next big type of biotic interaction. Those are predator-prey interactions, or predation, it's sometimes called, okay? So most organisms rely on eating other organisms for energy. We're going to talk more about that later too. Predator-prey interactions are when one organism that we call the predator kills and eats another organism. Okay, so it kills it and it eats it. That's predation. You might be saying to yourself, that sounds like parasitism because the predator benefits and the prey is harmed. Well, the difference is, remember, for it to be parasitism, because parasitism was a symbiotic relationship, it needed to be ongoing, kind of a long-lasting relationship, right? Parasites don't immediately kill their hosts. They, over a long time, might eventually kill their hosts, but the relationship lasts longer than just, I call predator-prey, one and done, right? Predator eats prey, that's it, it's over. That's the end of the interaction, okay? So that's why it's not considered a type of symbiotic relationship. So important to know the difference between that. Okay, so the populations of predators and prey really provide an insight to the interactions that happen in an ecosystem, and it helps you really visualize this idea of equilibrium in an ecosystem. So we have here a plot of the snowshoe rabbit population and the Canada lynx population. So I'm just going to color code this a bit because it is kind of hard to see. Okay, there we go. That makes it stand out a bit better. Which one is which? Okay, so what kind of trends are there? Well, the first thing I notice is that which graph is almost always taller? The blue one, right? The prey. What's the other kind of trend you notice here? So when I look at this, I kind of notice that, hey, when the blue graph goes up, the red graph goes up just after, right? See that? Every time there's a peak on the blue graph, shortly after comes a peak on the red graph, right? Pretty much without fail the whole time through. So let's just say that. So I noticed that when hares go up, right, the lynx goes up shortly after. So first the hares go up and then the lynx go up, but then the hares always go down, and then shortly after the lynx goes down too, right? Peak, drop, peak, drop, right? Blue peak, blue drop, red peak, red drop shortly after. So then hares drop and lynx do that, and then lynx follow them on that too. Okay, let's start to think about why would we observe trends like this? So I want you to think about this. So first, let's explain why the prey population is always higher than the predator population, okay? So I want you to think about this. Does a lynx just eat a rabbit and be done with it? They're good. They've now eaten a rabbit. They can live forever. No, right? A lynx probably has to eat multiple rabbits a day to survive. So you will always need more prey than predator in an ecosystem because the predator need a lot of prey to stay alive, right? To provide enough food resources, right? To keep one lynx alive, you need a whole bunch of rabbits. Okay, one lynx will eat many rabbits. Okay, now let's just think about why we see the rise, fall, rise, fall. So let's just start here and kind of see if we can explain why we would be seeing what we see. So first, what happens? The rabbit population goes up. So when the prey population is high, what does that mean for predators? Well, it means there's lots of food. It means they can have lots of babies. They can reproduce. There's lots of food, right? So there can be more predators too. If there's more prey to support them, there can be more predators. So what's going to happen? The predator population goes up. But if you're a prey and the predator population goes up, well, now there's more stuff eating you, right? There's more things to eat you. So what's going to happen to your population? Your population is going to start to go down. Okay, now, you're a predator and you've made the prey population go down. Can as large of a predator population be supported now? No, right? Unfortunately, some lynx are going to starve. There's not enough rabbits to support a big population. There's just not enough food out there for everybody. So with less food, now the predator population drops. Okay, so there's less predators. Hey, if you're a rabbit, what does that mean? Yeah, you're not getting eaten as much. So your population can now start to rise. You're probably thinking to yourself, Mr. Maxwell, how long is this going to go on? It seems like we're just going to keep doing this. Well, I'm going to stop there. Why would I stop there? And do you see it? Well, we're back to where we started, right? The prey population is high, so higher predators supported, right? And then the predator population is going to go up, eating more prey, so now the prey pop drops, right? And this is a repeating cycle. So once we hit step 4, we're back where we were at step 1. That is the second big type of biotic interaction, predator-prey. Different than parasitism because it's just one and done. It's not an ongoing relationship. The third and final type of biotic interaction we're going to look at in this topic are competition interactions. They're exactly what they sound like. It's when organisms need to compete. Why do they need to compete? What do they compete over? Well, the resources they need to survive. Why do they have to compete? Why can't they just share? There just will never be enough for everybody. Okay, that's what keeps an ecosystem in check. Because otherwise, every population would just keep growing and growing. That's what they want to do. That's kind of what's happening with humans, right? We're growing and growing and growing and growing because we don't have to work as hard for our food anymore. We don't really have to compete for it. And so our population is growing at an actually very unsustainable level. We'll see that later, right? Every population wants to grow, but guess what? There's just not enough. So we go back to the snowshoe hare on the from our predator-prey interaction, right? We can think of competition that way. Why did the lynx population eventually drop? Well, some lynx weren't getting enough food. Why, when the rabbit population dropped, did the lynx population have to drop after? Well, some lynx were going to have to miss out. They weren't going to catch a rabbit. They needed to compete with other lynx, and someone has to lose in a competition, right? Losing in this case meant starving. So lynx had to compete with other lynx for the hares of food stores. Now, lynx are the same species, and we call that type of competition intra-species competition. But there are other predators in that ecosystem. So, for example, the great horned owl also relies on the snow hare, and therefore it is also competing with lynxes. So competition like this between members of different species, like owls and lynxes, is called interspecies competition, right? So like international affairs is international relationships is relationships between Canada and other countries. So I remember it like this. So there's a nice little trick to remember. Inter has an ER, and so does different, right? Different species, interspecies competition. Intraspecies has an A, and so does same. So same species is intraspecies competition. Okay, let's try some practice with competition here. So 2 red-tailed hawks inhabit a section of plains in Saskatchewan and compete for the field mouse as their prey. What type of competition is this? So they both want the same food. They're competing for it. Are they the same species or different species? Well, they're 2 red-tailed hawks, right? So that is intra-species competition. Okay, although the two hawks are of the same species, one hawk has a slightly narrower frame, allowing it to dive faster than the other hawk. Which hawk do you think will be most likely to survive in this ecosystem? Well, what do you think? It's probably going to be the narrow hawk, right? If it can dive faster, it can get to food better. This is going to come up later when we talk about how evolution happens, okay? But because that hawk has an advantage in this competition, right, for resources, it's more likely to survive. It's more likely to get food. Okay, so just wrapping up this here, okay? So as we've seen, the biotic and abiotic factors can really limit the number of organisms that can survive in it, right? If there's not enough water, there's just not enough water, right? You can't get around that. So there won't be very many organisms supported. So that's an example of what we call a limiting factor. It limits the population. Now, there's always a maximum population of each species that any ecosystem can support. We call that maximum sustainable population the carrying capacity. So you might say that in this forest, there's enough resources to support no more than 700 moose. Okay, well, then we would say 700 is the carrying capacity of moose for that ecosystem. And so the carrying capacity is a result of all of these different limiting factors. Some of them are abiotic, like water availability, nutrient availability, amount of sunlight, stuff like that. Some of them are living things, though, right? As we saw, the carrying capacity of the rabbits was influenced by the lynx, right? There could be a larger maximum number of rabbits when there were fewer lynx, but there could be fewer rabbits when there were more lynx. So those were living limiting factors. Okay, one more example here. Grass has a difficult time growing both under and around the base of spruce trees. Both the grass and the spruce trees need water and other essential nutrients to stay healthy. In the end, both species can show signs of stress from attempting to live too closely together. So what type of biotic interaction is going on here? So it's not symbiosis because none of them really benefit from it, right? It's not predator-prey because nobody's eating anybody. This is competition. Now, are the grass and the tree the same species? Well, no, of course not, right? Grass isn't tree. So we have here an example of interspecies competition because it's two different species. How do they limit each other's population? Well, they're all drinking the same water and absorbing the same nutrients, right? Once that water's been drunk and the nutrients have been absorbed, there's no more left for anybody else. So there's a limited number of organisms that can exist here, right? Right? So if the grass drinks up the water, guess what? Less water for the spruce tree, and vice versa. Okay, so wrapping up here, the big ideas that hopefully you can pull out now. What is symbiosis, parasitism, commensalism, and mutualism? What are the general trends seen in a predator-prey relationship? What is competition? And what's the difference between interspecies and intraspecies competition?